Greetings and welcome to today's video. I'm going to try something a little different today. Ought to be, I hope, amusing and interesting. And that is, I'm going to discuss 3 different bargains that have been snapped up just recently here locally at garage sales and estate sales. I think you'll be surprised to find out just what a gold mine might be waiting for you at these sales. Whether you're looking for fine vintage components to build an amp from scratch, or you're looking for some really nice old hi-fi stereo amplifiers to use at home or in your workshop. So without further ado, let's take a close-up look at 3 gems that just showed up recently, and I think you'll get a kick out of them. Hey Rusty, are you going to drop that tennis ball and help me with a video? The audience needs your steady paw on the camera. Well, I guess not. Okay, let's say you're out trolling the garage sales or even Craigslist, and you turn up this jewel, a model 7D30 Zenith stereo in a console cabinet. Now, if you collect old vinyl albums, something like this would be just great for playing them, okay, and for reasons you'll see soon, it would play them very well. However, if you don't have room for a big cabinet like this in your house and you want to gain some really wonderful vintage components to build an amp from scratch, well, let me show you why this would be a fantastic deal. Well, here's what your $25 will buy you. Some 12-inch Alnico speakers. No great shakes for guitars, but not bad like for a workshop speaker. The control unit has a Mullard 12AU7 and an RCA 12AZ7 tube. And then over here is where the fun begins. Okay, we've got a pair of 12AX7s that were made in Holland, which sounds like Amperex to me. So 2 12AX7s, and now this is what'll get the juices flowing. Some 6 BQ5s, a set of 4, and all of them were made in Holland. These are Amperex 6 BQ5s, a match set of 4, and then a 5U4 rectifier tube. Then if that weren't enough, you've got a large, heavy, high current, American-made power transformer, and since it can handle all this tube complement, and you wanted to build a Vox AC30 clone, you've got the most expensive parts here on this $25 Zenith chassis. You've got your 6 BQ5s, and as good as it gets. You've got a heck of a good power transformer. You could use the 5U4 or throw in a GZ34. You probably have to buy a couple more 12AX7s, but all in all, for just what, $20 or so, you've got the makings of a really snazzy Vox AC30. Also, one other thing to remember, for those who turn their noses up at old console stereos, bear in mind that a stereo is just 2 separate amplifiers in one cabinet. So if you have decent components used in that stereo, you're going to get a double dose of them, okay? Instead of 2 really nice 6 BQ5s, you're going to get 4. So keep your eyes open for the stereo stuff. Also, the output transformers will be double-ended each, so you'll get 2 double-ended output transformers. Okay, all in all, it's too good a deal to pass up. Now you all may laugh, but I even use the vintage wire, especially when you're doing repair work in an old vintage chassis. You do the rewiring with this wire and it fits right in. It doesn't look like any work has been done. So I really find this wire to be very, very useful. Now we'll take a look under the hood, so to speak, and you see over here the control unit with all the potentiometers is much more complex and congested than the amplifier chassis itself. The capacitors are mostly the waxy style that don't hold up real well. And if you notice that we drew a line right through the center here of the chassis, this is one amplifier and this is one amplifier. I'm not going to discuss the schematic for this because it is a two-page schematic and quite elaborate. If you would like to see the schematic, you can check it out on the Radio Museum website. Next on the parade of bargains is this little gem right here, clearly marked as a Don McGowan 10-watt amp model M102. We've got the snazzy little heat shield here on top. We've got the microphone input and the music input. So this is obviously a PA amplifier where you would speak over the microphone and then could connect a phonograph and play music. The tone controls are hi-fi style where they have a zero middle position on each so that you can boost or suppress the treble or bass frequencies. Also, it should be noted these are active tone controls. So this is really a hi-fi public address amplifier. Well, here's a view of the top of the chassis with the heat shield removed. You notice a bunch of superficial rust here on the power transformer, which is very unusual for this part of the country, which stays very dry. There's two ways to connect your speakers to this chassis. First, you could have them connected to this plug, just plug them in, and then select your output impedance, 4, 8, or 16 ohms. Another way is to simply bring in your speaker wires, connect one to common, and connect the other speaker wire to either the 4, 8, or 16 ohm output. We've got the microphone input here, the phonograph input. Now if you wanted to convert this to guitar use, you'd have to install a 1/4 inch input jack somewhere on it. And there might be a couple other little minor modifications to make inside to the circuit, simply because this was intended to be more of a hi-fi amp than a guitar amplifier. Some of those modifications have been discussed in previous videos. Okay, let's take a look at the circuit here. First preamp tube's a 6AU6, rather unusual. Then we feed into the first half of a 6EU7. We have the treble and bass tone controls here, which feed into the second half of the 6EU7. And then we have another first stage of a 6EU7 here for preamplification, and then the second half of the 6EU7 used as the phase inverter with a pair of 6 BQ5s for output operating at 305 plate volts. As we already saw, we have this fairly elaborate output transformer which gives us 4, 8, and 16 ohm outputs. The rectification is down here at solid state using 2 diodes. Here we'll get a nice close-up look at the circuitry with the floor pan removed. You can see that it's beautifully laid out with a bus ground, all point-to-point wiring, Sprague orange drop capacitors, top quality components used throughout. And up here are the 2 rectifier diodes. The one repair necessary was that the original can capacitor was not fully functional. There was a 120 cycle hum, so I replaced each of the values that were within the can capacitor with individual electrolytic capacitors. The owner of this amp didn't want it modified for guitar use. He's going to use it with the phono input and just simply wanted it to function properly. When I tested it, it was just a good, clean, fairly strong amplifier. Really more hi-fi style than guitar style, but that doesn't mean that it couldn't be converted. So here we have a small, beautifully built hi-fi amplifier that was purchased, from my understanding, for about $35 at an estate sale here in town. The tube complement and general design of the amp reminds me a lot of the GA15 Gibson amp. So if you wanted to convert to guitar, this would be a great place to start. If you just want a really nice little hi-fi amp for your house or your workshop, you couldn't do better than this, especially at the price. The tubes alone are worth more than what the owner paid. Okay, this is our third and final estate sale find. Now imagine that you're shoving your way past all the little old grannies and their walkers so that you can be first to find the bargains, and you see this looks like a Samsonite suitcase of some sort, maybe a woman's overnight case, something like that. Surely nothing you'd be interested in, so you just run on by it. Well, if you did, you made a big mistake because you missed this name down here on the handle. Ampex. And if you notice, we have a little port here on the side where we have the signal input, and then the male connections for that weird sort of toaster-like power cord. The Ampex name tag here with the all-important and ubiquitous Underwriter Laboratory seal tells us this is a model 622, which is an auxiliary amplifier for an Ampex tape deck. Now, if you take time, you open the lid, you look inside, and here's a nice cord. A very unusual power cord and a very valuable power cord, it turns out. Okay, we'll just move it over to the side. Then we're going to take a look at what we have here. Okay, we've got the, this is a cast metal front plate, okay, with raised embossed lettering, level, equalization, speaker, on-off, fuse, and then it's got this speaker unit built in here, and this beast is fairly heavy. Let's take a look at the speaker. Well, one gander at the speaker and we know we're in the presence of something very special. Okay, what we have here is an 8-inch JBL or James B. Lansing cast aluminum basket speaker. About as good as it gets, okay, with a tuned port to enhance the bass response. It's in a sealed compartment which is fully lined with fiberglass sound deadening material. You can tell by the very heavy doping of the cone that this jewel for an 8-inch speaker was built to handle some power. Okay, it's got the spring-loaded terminals, absolutely state-of-the-art, just as good as it can be. One thing I learned doing research on the internet is that this speaker is glued to the baffle and should never be removed. Fortunately, I did the research before I tried to remove the speaker. So be real careful. You need to check into this stuff. When you see something of this quality, be hesitant to mess with it until you know what it is. Okay, before we take a look at the chassis itself, let's take a look at a schematic of the circuit. Here you see the input comes in through the volume control to the grid of the EF86. The first preamp tube comes through here to the 12AU7, both sides of which are used for the phase inversion, which drives the 6V6 output tubes through the output transformer to the speaker. The 6V6s operate at 355 plate volts as provided by the 6AX5 rectifier. It looks like it has two of them. This is just showing each of the diodes of the rectifier. Next, I'll draw your attention to this negative feedback loop, which is very unusual. It comes back here through this very elaborate circuitry, including the equalizer or the tone control right here, and then feeds back into the cathode of the EF86. In a previous video, we discussed how these negative feedback loops can be used for tone control, and this is an excellent example. In a hi-fi type of amp, how the negative feedback loop is used for the tone control circuit of the amplifier. Finally, I want to draw your attention right here to the screen resistor that feeds the B+ to the screens of the two 6V6s. It's a 2-watt resistor for a good reason, because it flows a lot of current. Also, as we will see in just a few minutes, this is a very important resistor. Please remember it. Next, let's undo the 4 corner screws here and slide the chassis out of the cabinet and take a look at it. Well, here's the chassis, and as you can see, it's extremely compact. Okay, the tube complement is a little unusual Over here we have a EF86 preamp tube, then a 12AU7 with both sections used for phase inversion, a pair of 6V6s, and then sort of an unusual rectifier, a 6AX5, which is not exactly a fire-breathing rectifier compared to even a 5Y3. Okay, but it seems to do its job. We've got a massive power transformer and an equally substantial output transformer. The tubes are all the original RCA tubes except for this one, and I'll describe why in just a second. Now I'll tell you, this is no joy to take apart. It's like a Chinese puzzle, and I think part of it is because to be so compact, they had to use certain design principles that did not lend themselves to easy repair. As you can see inside, point to point, with really high quality components, including here a nice big fat juicy bumblebee capacitor. High grade stuff everywhere. The one problem with this amp was that one of the original 6V6s had a dead short between the screen and grid. And when that happens, it makes you glad that they have screen resistors in place, because the screen resistor is sort of like a fuse. It sacrifices itself to protect the power transformer, and the original screen resistor did. It just burnt up, and when it did, smoke came out of the chassis. This was before I got my hands on this, because I would not have just plugged it in, as you well know. The guy who bought this brought it to me all scared and said, you know, they'd almost burned his house down. Well, you could tell from the smell there were some problems. So I checked, and sure enough, so I replaced the shorted 6V6 and installed a new screen resistor. So far so good. There's still some more testing and work to be done, but I thought you'd get a kick out of the beautiful construction and the high quality components that were used in this tiny little amp chassis. Well, that's about it for this video. Okay, we took a close look at 3 different garage sale bargains. I think you'll agree that with stuff like this out there, it's time to get up early and start trampling grannies, because there's good deals to be made. Also, I think we saw evidence of why, when you're starting up an old amp for the first time, you really need to have a current limiter and, if possible, a variac to bring the circuit up slowly to full operating voltage. If you don't have a variac, at least be sure you have a current limiter to protect the components within the amp. Well, that's about it. Hopefully we'll see you in the next video. Stay tuned. Thanks for watching, and bye for now. Well, Rusty, are you going to put down your trusty tennis ball and help me with this video? Or are you going to hide under the din buggy? Or hide behind the din buggy?